want to do a real quick synopsis of our antenna thing we talked about. If you guys remember, we started out, we talked about dipoles, then we talked about feed line, and then the feed line, the half wavelength principle, and we also talked about loss. Last time we demonstrated how different cables had different losses in it. And then we have this little box here as a question mark, and most of you probably figured it out that that's a balun. So what I wanted to do is just, we talked about the 3 steps of building your HF wire antenna. So I want to go really quickly tonight. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. And I also wanted to take the first step is, I've had a couple questions people ask me about the, where'd 468 come from? And why don't we use that? Why don't we use 492 on this one? So the bottom line is pretty simple. 468, and we're going to keep it right here. And this time I'm going to try to write a little bit better, divided by frequency in megahertz, gives you guys what? The length in feet, right? For a half wavelength, okay? So where did that number come from? Well, that number came from, the answer is everything we're going to be talking about today started with the speed of light. So let's start there. So the speed of light actually travels at about 299,700 and blah, 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 blah. And you round it off, it's 300 million meters per second, okay? So when you see that formula where they go 300, okay, and let's say I wanted to go, I put in 80 meters, right? It'll equal frequency. So what's that number going to come out?
3 times 10 to the 8th minus, or divided by...
Well, 300 divided by 80.
It's around 4.
Divided by
It's 4. It's 4. I'm gonna write that better. So if we were doing 80 meters, that comes out 4 megacycles, right? So, and that's going to be, that's for a full wavelength, right? So where did they come? We come up with this 468. Well, that's a full wavelength. So if we cut this 300 in half, we have 150, right? So 150 meters, this 150 number, we got to convert that by what's 3 feet or 1 meter equals
450.
Well, it's actually, the number is actually 3.208. So somebody do that. Take 150 for me and do 150 and multiply it times 3.2804, I think. Cool. Yeah, 3.2804. Please do that. It comes out to be 492.06, right? 492. God, I can't write. Art, you teachers are so great with your writing, usually. 492.08. So this is where it all starts. Because we went from the speed of light and we brought it down to, from a full wave, we brought it down to a half wave. We multiplied it by our English standard, which brought us to 492. So we said our 492 happens to be, this is your half wavelength number divided by frequency gives you the length in feet. And you ask yourself, well, where is this 468 I keep thinking from? Keep talking about. Where's it coming from? 492 times 0.95. What's that? It comes out to actually be 467.4 blah, 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 blah. Okay? So that is the 468 number that the handbook gives you, because if you go back and you look at these numbers, like real scientists do, thank you, Antonio, I appreciate that, like the real guys do, these numbers go to the right of the decimal place quite a bit, right? And they carry them out like 8, 10 places. But for ham radio purposes, they rounded that off to 468. They rounded that off to 492. And the reason that works so well for us, it gets us better than in the ballpark. We're like kind of right on top of the groove, right there, man. And what are we gonna do to this feed point? What are we going to do to the length of these 2 wires anyways? Exactly. We're going to start with them a little bit longer, and we're going to trim them, okay? So I just want to give you a little bit of history of where it came from. And the reason I did that is because 468 divided by frequency in megahertz gives you, we're going to get rid of that because we don't need it anymore. It's going to give you the the length in feet, okay?
What frequency you want?
So, and you put what, and I'm going to let you guys decide what frequency you want. So if you wanted to, let's pick the middle, let's take 3.9, middle of the 80 meters. So 3.9 megahertz, let's just do that.
That comes out 120 feet on the dot.
Okay, so 468 divided by 3.9 megahertz. And Bruce, what was that answer, please?
120 feet.
120 feet on the dot, right?
Tip to tip.
Tip to tip. So what we would divide this by 2 to get that length and that length. And we're going to add a modest amount so we have a little bit over, so we could trim it and fold it back and get it as perfect as we can. So we started out with these basic numbers. 468 divided by frequency in megahertz gives us our length in feet from tip to tip, and our feed points in the center. And all things being ham radio perfect, this would be coming down at approximately 35 to 45 degree angle. And we come up here with our impedance meter and we put it on there, and because we magically can levitate up there, and we put it on there and you trim it and you go, that's exactly 50 ohms at 3.9 megahertz for this example. In our perfect ham radio world, we built this antenna. It's exactly resident at 3.9 megahertz at that feed point. So now what's the next thing we want to do? We want to put a piece of cable to it, right? So we want to run a feed line to it. So this is where I felt like I've had a lot of questions. I'm going to run over this real quick. See, this is my cool PL259 plug right there, in case anybody's wondering. So we want to know how long to make this piece. Notice we haven't connected it yet, but we're going to hook it up. And what we would want to do is we'd want to make this piece of cable a half wavelength long, or half wavelength multiples. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3, of our lowest frequency used. And in this case, we're going to say 3.9 is our center. So we're going to take that 492, and I need somebody with a calculator to just keep doing the numbers for me. So we're going to take 492 and we're going to divide it by 3.9 megahertz.
126 feet.
And it's 126 feet.
For the speed of light.
For the speed of light. Now we're next step. This is where I got a lot of questions. You look this, you see I need 126 feet, and you have decided based on that chart that we gave you that's in the ARRL handbook, it's all over the internet, it's everywhere. I want the low loss cable. So you bought mil-spec RG 213, right? And the velocity factor, if I remember correctly, is either 0.66 or 0.68. Does anybody remember? Close by. We're going to go with 0.66 because it is. So we're going to say the VF equals 0.66. So we're going to take our 126 feet and we're going to multiply this times 0.66. What is that number?
83 feet.
83 feet. So,
Electrical feet.
so now we've got our half wavelength dipole. It's set for 3.9 and it's this length. And then we come over here and we took the half wavelength speed of light with no velocity factors, and we're not shortening anything. And we divided by our frequency, and we come up with what would that length be at free air and the speed of light. No resistance by this cable. And then we say it's 126. And then we look up our cable, and we say that cable has a velocity factor of 0.66. And we multiply 126 times 0.66, and it comes out to 83 feet. So now we can pretty safely say that my reasonably perfect, in our example, resonant antenna at 3.9 has a feed point impedance of 50 ohms, or really close. Maybe it's 49, maybe it's 52, but it's darn close, right? Because we used our MFJ or our Rig Expert or our Comet, and we figured it out. Now, we're going to come over here and we make this piece of cable, and the next thing we need, what we're going to ask ourselves, why did we even bother doing this? Does anybody know? Does anybody remember? This man right here does. Exactly. For the lack of a better way to explain it, it makes this like a transparent tunnel at that frequency. So at that frequency, if this antenna is resonant, is 50 ohms, it's going to represent 50 ohms down here. It's going to be like, it's as close to not there as it could be. Now there's one other factor we talked about. We mentioned it just a few minutes ago. The actual loss in the cable, the resistive loss, right? How much dB per foot do we lose? So if I chose, and I'm going to grab numbers, guys, out of the sky because we're going slow. If I used RG58, the small stuff, would that be a higher loss or a lower loss than 213? Much higher loss, exactly. And what happens when I go higher in frequency? Does my loss increase or decrease? It increases. So this might not be a good choice because it might be too lossy. Then we go to the next stuff. We go the RG, and there's different ways they write it. It's 8, if I could write it 8. RG8X, RG8 Mini. So we're going to go with RG8X. And remember, we talked about that. We've often bought it off of the internet, Amazon, in 50 and 100 foot links, right? So that's where you got to ask yourself that very important question. Is that 50-foot length of RG8X a good choice for my 3.9 megahertz 80-meter antenna that's 120 feet long? Why would it be a bad choice? It's too short. And what's it going to do when you hook it up to your antenna and put your nice MFJ or whatever brand you have impedance meter? What's it going to do? And we're assuming we know this antenna is right. Now we put that piece of coax that's 50 feet in there. We're going to say it's going to change it. It's going to be wrong. And then what happens? What do most guys do? It's wrong, right? They bought a brand new piece of coax. I did the numbers, and I hooked it up, and it's wrong. I can't get my SWR. What do?
Throw a tuner on it.
You put a tuner on it, or you get out. Most guys get out there and start changing the length of their antenna.
Yeah.
So, to give you an idea, this is one of our viewers sent in an email last week and said he had that exact problem, and he said I was having trouble on I think it was 20 meters, and I don't know what other band. He said they did this, and it says, and miraculously, people started hearing him, and he heard people better. He says they've been playing with it off and on, trying to tune it, and then did this, and it just made it easier for him. Does that mean you can't tune in it, make this match? Eventually you can. So now we know how long our antenna needs to be. We know where the number came from. We know we took that speed of light number, used it to calculate the length of our RG. We're going to say this is RG213 is our example, because that's a very good cable. And we're just not going to use this stuff. And we come to the conclusion that it needs to be really close to 83 feet. Really good question. So it's multiples of that. So who's got their calculator? Because I don't. The lowest frequency used was 3.9, right?
Yeah.
Double 3.9. 7.8. So that's going to put you it's going to put you above 40 meters, right? And then you would double that again, right? And it's going to put you above 20 meters. So what you're going to want to do is what I did. I did one frequency that everything lines up perfectly. So what you can do is you say, okay, I got a multiple band antenna. So what if let's just do the numbers. So let's say you take 40 meters and you go 7150. What's 7150 times 2? So it's right at the top of the 20 meter band, right? So you're in the groove. You're way closer than you would be if you didn't do that. And you're going to be right on that frequency, right? Now, divide that by 2, and you'll be back to your original. No, divide that by 2.
3.5.
So you're just below 3.6. So you're not, and I experimented with this to prove the point. If I took a 50-foot piece of coax and tried to use it on this antenna, which I did, and you just couldn't get it to behave well. It just wouldn't. And then you took a piece of coax and you cut it at, even at 3.9, and you set it up and you put a 50 ohm dummy load on the end of that and you sweep it, you could see your bandwidth on your MFJ. And what you're going to see is that it's pretty dang good. I mean, you can go pretty far without it getting too wonky, okay? So, yeah, you can go multiple band, but is there a multi-band perfect setup for every single frequency?
It's always a compromise.
There's always, exactly. So we are at a compromise, but what we're doing is, instead of being way off in left field with the wrong length of coax, it's not the proper length for anything or any multiple. We've tried to come up with a piece of coax in your example that hits each, at least the edges of each band and close to the middle of one. But as second you get dead on middle and you sweep the band and go, man, this is awesome, one of the other bands is going to be off a little bit. It's just going to be that way. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Now, the last but not least, we're going to take all this and we're going to connect it to the antenna. And that is where I hear a lot of different discussion. So let's start off. Somebody earlier said, well, we can roll it up and make a coax. You guys have probably heard the term ugly balun. Anybody heard that? Ugly balun? Okay, so ugly balun is often just some guys winding on I've heard 7-inch, 8-inch, a coffee can, and you put, I've heard anywhere from 6 to 7 turns, right? You put it on there, and you put that, and take the can out, obviously, and then that becomes your balun between your antenna feed point and the end of your coax. You hook it up. A lot of guys go, man, that works great. I talk to everybody. It's probably right. And he puts his SWR meter on there and goes, man, I hardly had to trim my antenna. Well, that being said, if you take something like this, and I wound this, and we're going to have a balun night sometime. We're going to hook all these up, and we're going to show you guys the difference and why one's different than the other. This is a coax balun that has pretty good, take you from the balance to the unbalanced pretty good. And it's good down from, because of all these extra turns, it works quite good from 160, 80, 40, and behaves pretty good on 20, but after you get past 20 meters, it's too much inductance. It doesn't like it. So I use this on on my 40, 80, 20 meter multi-band dipole for about 2 years. And, I hung it from here, the antenna hooked to the eye hooks, and the wires were connected directly to it. And I ran legal limit through this all the time. But I ran it on resident antennas. And I ran a piece of coax up to it that was really close to right. Nothing got hot, nothing blew up. I didn't have any problems with it at all. So this is one way of doing it. But this version does not cover well past 20 meters. It just doesn't. Also, it doesn't have a great common mode, which the common mode, we'll talk more in depth about that later, but you may have heard about energy coming back down your line. You need something here that will help keep that energy from coming back down your shield, because as Bruce said earlier, and TJ, these lines, energy is going up this piece of coax, equal and opposite, and because it's a half wavelength, it has a tendency just to be transparent. Now we hook this antenna up here that's got something going on, and inadvertently we get energy coming back down the braid at some level. So you want your balun to have what's called a high common mode, so that if a signal tries to come down here that's the same it's the same signal, they're both in phase, that thing will cancel it and keep it from coming down here. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I'm going to give you guys next time a physical example. You'll see it on a screen, and I'll give you some links to YouTube to some guys that did a really great job. So the next thing you could do is you could go, gee, I'm just going to call MFJ up. I'm going to buy this. I think this is $29. And this actually belongs to Bruce. I stole it from him. He probably forgot. So here, Bruce. So we tested this one. We swept it. And it's actually pretty darn good. It does its job as a balun. It goes from balanced to unbalanced quite well. And it also has a pretty good common mode. It's in the neighborhood of 20 dB, which you would want in excess of 20 dB. You want 25 or 30. You want to just kill that junk so it doesn't come back down and get into your shack and get into your audio and do goofy stuff like that. So this is actually pretty good. It's very cost effective. It's already built, and I wouldn't fault you for buying it. And then I run into stuff like this. This is the happens to be the W9INN balun box, and MFJ is one of the distributors of this. This, though, is a 4-to-1 balun. So this does impedance matching. So 50 ohms in, 200 ohms out. So this would be used on wire antennas such as loops or quads or things that have a higher input impedance. And I tested this one too. I go, I wonder what the common mode on this is. Really sucky. It's impedance matching and does a beautiful job. It handles full legal limit, but it doesn't do a good job if I got something screwy going on and letting the RF come down the line. It doesn't do a good job. And truthfully, guys, when I bought the thing, I didn't know that till I tested it. And they don't speak about that in the instructions, to my knowledge. I haven't looked at the instructions lately. There's another type of balun. It's called a current balun, or a 1-to-1 balun. And the reason I like this type is because we are going 1-to-1. We're really close to 50 ohms. Our line is 50 ohm cable, and our radio is 50 ohms. And if I could get everybody to be 50 ohms and operate on that frequency and happy, I'm going to get as much energy as I get up to my antenna. I'm going to have little or no common mode, or I'll have maximum isolation, and everybody's happy. So this is an example of what you can wind. You can buy these. They're built into boxes, and the coax goes in on one side, and your antenna goes on the other side. And these are equal but opposite windings, okay? So what happens is if the energy tries to come down these wires, and they're in phase here, same energy comes down. They get into here because these are equal and opposite. It cancels it. This one cancels down to approximately 27, 28 dB, which is really good as it tries to come out this side. So I get good isolation from this side to this side. And another thing we wanted it to do, and all of them we want them to do, is when you put your 50 ohm coax on here and put your 50 ohm antenna on here and you start sweeping it, you want it to affect your SWR, your match, as little as possible. So you can put a 50 ohm resistor on here and hook this to your analyzer, your MFJ, and start turning the knob. And if this is a wideband transformer, the needle will just be dead on 50 ohms, 51, 52 ohms. And as you change frequency, the better these are, the less it changes. So you'll find some of them that really are wound well, and they go from easily 80 meters to 10 meters, and you're going, wow, that thing works great. And then you get another one, and you do the same exact thing. Go, man, when I get to past 20 meters, starts doing, my SWR goes up, because it's not built to handle that higher frequency. And just for those of you who happen to recognize this transformer, Bruce, this is not the right, I did this for as an example. There's different core materials for different applications, and this is one I grabbed out of the junk box just to see what it would do. But it's the wrong core. So if you're making your own, you got to pay attention to what cores you buy, which are readily available for between $5 and $10, and you have to use, typically you use Teflon or that PTFE type wire, high temperature, or you buy the high temperature enameled wire and wind it. Get your antenna cut to the right length. We know where the numbers came from. Oh, good, we're almost right on time. We know where 492 came from and why we're using it and why we come up with this number, multiply it times the velocity factor. This VF, velocity factor, changes with types of cable and manufacturers. So you got to look it up. Don't go off Kevin's bad memory or your okay memory. Just look it up so we know. Because there's velocity factors between 0.66, and there's some of that cable out there that's like 0.81, 0.82. It's pretty dang fast. So you just got to know what you're dealing with. We do.
Building is a pretty good wire.
Building's an excellent wire. And then you move down here and you decide what balun I'm going to put in there, and you insert the balun, and now you've got a dipole antenna. And one question came up earlier was the multiband. This exact configuration, and what's interesting is this 83 feet of wire, I happen to use a piece of LMR 400 Superflex. I bought a piece at a swap meet or something, and it was within a half a foot of being it's a little longer. The velocity factor was higher, and I put the antenna up, and I did 80, 40, and 20, and I can take my radio and put it on there. I can operate on 80, 40, and 20 with no tune. Very edge of the 80 meter band at the bottom. I put mine up in the middle of the general band, because that's mainly who I talk to, is up that part of the band. So mine's tuned around 3.875, something like that. And so it goes right up to the top of the band, right close to 4, really good. It goes down there. It basically, you're going to get about 75 kilohertz both directions. Pretty comfortable. And then we need to go to past that, too low. Yeah, use your tuner to touch it up, because, like I said, there's no one perfect antenna for every single band.